This is now lecture 4.2, continuing from lecture 4.1, and we're still talking about politics and the state. We finished off last time looking at the patriarchal state, and now we move on to the different roles of the state. Minimal states lay down conditions for orderly existence only. They act as a type of night watchman over society. In other words, in minimal states, liberals enjoy individual freedoms, which is considered to be most important. However, at the same time, the state does have capacity to constrain human behavior and prevent individuals from encroaching on the human rights of others. That's where the night watchman function comes in. A minimal state has three main functions. It exists to maintain domestic order, to ensure that contracts are enforced within society, and to provide protection against external attack. A minimal state acts in contrast to developmental states. Developmental states, for example, America and the United Kingdom during the Industrial Revolution or the Age of Industrialization in the 1800s, or Japan during the Meiji period, all reflected principles of developmentalism. This is very specific in that a state intervenes purposefully in an attempt to promote economic growth and development in a state. So they construct partnerships then between the state and major economic interests of that state. Japan, France, and Germany are examples. South Africa is an example, inclined towards developmental principles in Africa. And America under President Barack Obama during the international credit crunch or global economic crisis. The main distinction, therefore, between this type of state and a minimal state is the level of intervention a state has in the marketplace. What about social democratic states then? These type of states aim to rectify past imbalances and injustices that a market economy might create. In this case, then, a state is seen as a kind of necessary evil. Therefore, the shift is away from the negative view of the state to a positive view of the state. A state must exist in order to ensure liberty and promote social justice in society. The whole idea being to eradicate poverty in the long run and reduce inequalities. Social democratic states have two features: Keynesianism and social welfare. Keynesianism refers to the management or regulation of capitalism with a view to promoting growth as well as maintaining full employment in society. Social welfare is the promotion of social well-being among citizens, thereby enabling the principle of individual empowerment. Both of these principles must feature in order for a state to be classified as a social democratic state. Historically, we've seen examples of collectivized states. These type of states exert full control over the entire economic life of the state. The best example from history would be that of the USSR, or the Soviet Union, that is, during the Cold War period, where they abolished private enterprise completely and set up centrally planned economies. An example of this in reality would have been collective farms, such as this. See if you can guess what type of state we might refer to the Hitler period. Totalitarian states. These type of states are all-encompassing with regard to the politicization of people's lives. In other words, there's a complete annihilation of the boundaries between politics and civil society. Not only the economy, but also education, culture, religion, and family life are all politicized by the totalitarian states. In other words, the influence of the state is felt in all aspects of human existence, and the best example of this would have been Hitler's Germany. We also refer to religious states. Many centuries ago, in aristocratic states, rulers said that they had to rule those kingdoms by divine right. In other words, God had granted the kings and queens the right to rule over the citizenry. However, over time, increasingly as people became disillusioned with the power of this church, there became a kind of separation between the church and the state, what we refer to as secularism, or laïcité in French. Secularism just means separation of the church and the state. However, since the 1980s, we've seen a re-emergence of religious states, with the rise of religious fundamentalism, especially, for example, Pakistan after 1978, where you see this riot, no democracy, we want just Islam. So these type of states still exist in the world today. How then do you make sense of this current debate around the state in a global era, and the argument that the state or statehood is declining as an important actor on the world stage? The state in a global era is defined by 3 points. Globalization and state transformation is number 1. Non-state actors and international bodies is number 2. And failed states and state building is number 3. So if we go back to the first one, the discussion on globalization and state transformation, there are 3 contrasting positions that exist in the world today. One, that the state is declining as a meaningful actor on the world stage, and what we're really moving into is a type of post-sovereign governance. If you think about this example, though, we don't have one world government. All we have that is close to that is United Nations. The United Nations cannot enforce or impose decisions on any independent state. So post-sovereign governance is very far away. The second view is that there is no change to the core features of world politics, and that in fact the sovereign state is still the most important actor on the world stage. Consider how at each international political sporting event, states are very keen to self-identify as their own independent state. Qualitative changes have transformed the state, not reduced its power. That's the third contrasting view. This idea that states simply change in terms of what role they have in society and what the consequences are of statehood. It doesn't mean that state power is reduced. If anything, state power might be increasing, just in different ways. An important point to remember under this section is that we can't deny an increasing economic activity going on around the globe in a kind of globalized, borderless world, especially the illicit global economy that doesn't recognize borders of any kind. So we have to consider supra-territoriality, which is what this is. Supra meaning larger than, bigger than, smaller territories. This huge economic borderless world of supra-territoriality, above or larger than normal territories. We also have wording like economic sovereignty or the market state being the only reliable states that exist in the world today. Capitalism is the way to move forward. Secondly, we cannot ignore the fact that there are non-state actors and international bodies that exist in the world today who are not states but might exert influence on the international platform. Transnational corporations, or TNCs, also referred to as multinational corporations, or MNCs. 51 of the world's top 100 largest economies are actually corporations, big businesses. In other words, 51 of the world's largest economies are not states, but companies. General Motors in Denmark, for example, Walmart, which is like our ShopRite or Checkers in Poland, ExxonMobil in South Africa. These are multinational, transnational companies in a globalized world. There are also increasingly global civil society members that are acting on the world stage and making a difference. Greenpeace, for example, certainly hits home with its messages and adverts. Political globalization exists in the world today. Consider the Arab Spring and how the effects of the Arab Spring took root politically across the globe. There is also the growing phenomenon of multi-level governance. We have states at home that govern. We have states that are members of regional bodies. We have regional bodies that are members of larger continental bodies. And we have continental bodies that are all members of the United Nations. We also have this phenomenon known as the pooling of sovereignty. The European Union is the best example of this. You'll learn more about sovereignty and the pooling of sovereignty when you discuss international organizations under Introduction to International Relations in Semester 2. The third point to consider under the state and the decline of the state is failed states and state building. The weak state refers to those type of states that are desperately trying to govern in a normal environment but are unable to for various reasons. Weak states often experience warlordism. Look in Hayward for the definition. Widespread criminality and social dislocation results. If a government cannot govern due to weakness, corruption, inability to govern, and inability to protect its own citizens, it's referred to as a weak state, a failing state, or ultimately a failed state. Failed states refer to those states who are unable to maintain domestic order and personal security of their citizens. Look at Somalia. Also, though, look at the idea of state building and around Sierra Leone as an example. How Sierra Leone burst onto the world scene, how that state was built up, who makes up the state of Sierra Leone, what is its political history. Another way to consider the different strengths of states in the modern world is to look at the Fragile States Index. Essay number 1 suggests that you do this for me as part of this semester's essay topics. The Fragile State Index looks at those states it considers to be sustainable states, the blue countries. The green states are seen as stable. The yellow, red, and orange states are facing warning signs. And then some states are on very high alert, like Sudan and South Sudan, Somalia, the Central African Republic. The Fragile State Index, just so you know, is a Western-based organization that looks at the Fragile State Index, the Fund for Peace in particular, and so this might be reflecting a very particular point of view. You can look at different sources to try and identify how you would define a failed or failing state, or how you would define a strong or stable state. This is the end of the lecture on politics and the state. Remember that this is important for your exam coming up in June, and feel free to ask me as your lecturer any questions around this lecture, or your tutors, to make sure that you understand and assimilate all of the information. Thank you very much.